Welcome to Responding to Conflict with Emotional Intelligence, a webinar for Vista leaders. Emotional intelligence competencies are often essential in addressing and diffusing conflict with others. I'm your host, Andy King, Senior Training Specialist with AmeriCorps Vista, and I'm pleased to introduce to you our presenter, Eric Stiefvater. Eric is a training designer and project coordinator at Education Northwest. He is a former Vista and has worked with us for many years, providing face-to-face and online training for Vista members, leaders, and supervisors. Eric, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Andy. I'm really glad to be here and talk with all of you on the topic of responding to conflict with emotional intelligence. As Andy said, I've had the privilege of working with Andy and his team for many years, helping Vista members, leaders, and supervisors succeed in their work in communities. We know from this work that communication, problem solving, and flexibility are key competencies that help Vistas and anyone really succeed in their work. They're also key competencies for managing conflict. So let's take a look at our session outcomes. I'll be sharing information about the role of emotions in conflict, as well as tips and strategies for cultivating and applying emotionally intelligent responses to conflict situations that you might come across in your work as a Vista leader. By the end, we're hoping that you will be able to define emotional intelligence, identify ways to cultivate emotional intelligence in yourself, and apply emotionally intelligent practices to manage conflict. So let's begin with an overview of emotions and how they contribute to and shape conflict. But to get us warmed up, we're going to have a little activity. Andy will give us a preview here.
Sure. So some of you already responded to this prompt in the chat as we were waiting to start. So now I'd like to invite everyone, if you haven't had a chance already to do so, to go ahead, use the chat, and type a short response to the prompt that you see on the slide. So the question is, when you were a participant or an observer of a conflict, what were you thinking or feeling? So again, think back to a time. It could be, when you were in your role as a Vista leader, or, at any other time, and when that conflict was happening, what kind of thoughts or feelings were running through your head? Again, make sure you send it to all panelists and attendees so that everyone will be able to see your comment. So we've got a lot of a nice variety of responses here. First, some concern about fairness, wanting everyone who's involved to feel included and heard. Others talked about feelings of confusion or frustration, annoyance. I feel the need to find a solution, even when I'm not sure what. Again, confusion, frustration. Some asking themselves, how can I end this quickly and peacefully? Or trying to remind oneself to be open-minded, to listen to other thoughts and feelings, or starting to think about what comes next, thinking about next steps. How can I respond? What should I do? And others, more feelings of being discouraged or feeling helpless, feeling anxiety. So, Eric, what stood out for you among these comments?
Yeah, I think lots of notes of how for some people it was the time of strong emotions, either annoyance or anxiety. But several folks kind of presage some of the things we'll be talking about later. So some tips or things they've discovered, perhaps just by trial and error, that they found helpful or thought would be helpful, or had in mind, whether they were able to apply it the way they hoped they would or not. But yeah, so thoughts about how do I mediate the situation? And also I'm seeing some notes of self-awareness, which is again something we'll talk about, like what do I do? How do I mediate? what's happening. So yeah, a mix of kind of like initial feelings and reactions, but also some self-awareness that we're in a conflict, and some searching our brains for what we should try to do to either end the situation or manage it successfully. So yeah, so it sounds like some of you have really kind of thought about this, or are deep thinkers and very reflective folks. So we look forward to exploring that a bit more and helping us all add more tools or enhance the ones that we already have for responding to emotion and managing conflict. So I think with that, why don't we talk a little bit about emotions and their role in conflict. All right, so what are emotions? Seems like a simple question, of course. Well, you can certainly make it more complex. And one definition is that emotions are the meaning we give to our felt responses to stimuli in the environment around us. Doesn't seem so simple when you put it that way, does it? So like humans themselves, our emotions are a complex combination of physiological changes in our body, such as heart rate, breathing, and hormones, and our conscious perceptions and judgments of them. Finally, they're a complicated interaction between different parts of the brain responsible for instinctual responses and higher order thinking. So you've probably heard of this term trigger. An emotional trigger is something said or done by others that creates a powerful, sometimes involuntary reaction. It can be a reaction that is out of proportion to the immediate stimulus. This sometimes happens because we associate the trigger with another situation that harmed or hurt us in the past. In response to a trigger, we might withdraw emotionally, or simply feel hurt or angry, or we might respond in an aggressive way. What you see on the slide is a short list of common types of triggers, but you might be able to think of other ones. Each of us has our own unique likes and dislikes, personalities and habits, of course. So also, we will all have our own unique and different emotional triggers. And some of us might be more sensitive to some of these triggers than others. So triggering is at root a survival response to stress. Our bodies tend to have one of three involuntary responses to stress: freeze, fight, or flee. Sometimes you'll hear it phrased as freeze, fight, or flight. That is, in response to stress, we might become paralyzed, we might lash out at others, or we might physically flee, or at least mentally check out of the situation. We all have a tendency towards one of the three, although we might react differently depending on specific stressful situations. For example, if you're a parent yourself, perhaps, you might have felt this yourself, but a parent might generally feel an urge to flee stressful situations in everyday life, but they might react in an enraged mama or papa bear mode, as I've sometimes heard people describe it, if they perceive a threat to their children. So these reflexes may be helpful if we're experiencing a mortal threat or truly threatening situation, but it is not always helpful in situations where the stakes are considerably lower. Conflict can be one of those situations. Many of us experience or perceive conflict as stressful, become tense or anxious, and flee, and sometimes and feel or sometimes act on those freeze, fight, or flight survival instincts. But conflict is normal, it's natural, and it's even a healthy component of any relationship. And it naturally occurs whenever human beings live and work together. Conflict is the expression of need, and it can help a relationship grow and improve when both parties' needs are clear. So we should be clear here that we're talking about conflict today on this webinar in the sense of conflicting needs, understandings, and goals among colleagues or peers working together towards a common objective, such as you might find in a professional workplace. Some of these same principles will apply to conflicts that arise in interpersonal relationships or in communities, but those types of conflict have different dimensions that we don't have time to dive into right now. We should add that in some lines of work, conflict can be a truly life-threatening situation and require advanced skills in de-escalation and mediation. So public safety and mental health crisis intervention are a couple of examples that come to mind. But we're assuming that most of us on this webinar today are not typically facing those types of situations. To sum up a little bit, humans are emotional beings, and just because we are at work, we can't expect to not have any emotions at all. Teamwork and cooperation rely heavily on each team member's communication and on trust. So if we ignore the emotions of others, we'll have a hard time establishing trust and developing a productive working relationship. Understanding the role emotions play in human interaction can also help us better understand and respond to conflict. Emotions fuel conflict, but also drive its resolution. In addition, as leaders, we are often held to higher standards by those we lead. Team members expect us to control our impulses and anger, to withstand adverse events and stressful situations, to be happy with life, and to be a cooperative member of the group. Managing difficult conversations and conflicts is a necessary skill of leadership. And so being aware of and responsive in productive ways to emotions helps us read our teams and help them solve problems and work through conflict. Okay. So we'll take a look at a concept that some of you may be familiar with or have spent some time with, but might be newer to other folks. And that is emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence can help us be productive colleagues and leaders in the workplace, and it also can help us better and understand and respond to conflict. Identifying and attending to emotions that underlie conflict helps us resolve it in ways and build trust and understanding and support collaborative problem solving. So emotional intelligence, defined, is the capacity to recognize your feelings and the feelings of others. It's sometimes expressed as emotional quotient or EQ, as of course compared to intelligence quotient or IQ. The term has actually been around a while. It's been with us since the 1960s, but it got really popular when it was discussed in a series of books by Daniel Goleman. Some studies have shown that people with high emotional intelligence have greater mental health, job performance, and leadership skills, but there is some controversy about how strong that connection is. So, emotional intelligence encompasses both perception, or what I see, and action, or what I do, as well as personal and social competence. So you can see those dimensions up on your screen there. So let's talk about each of these elements of the quadrant. So self-awareness involves perceiving and understanding our own emotions. As we were saying in the chat, we saw some good comments where people seemed to be talking about how they felt a sense of self-awareness, or they were kind of observing what they were observing and observing themselves in the situation. The next one is self-management, and that involves taking action to regulate those emotions to maintain calm and focus. Social awareness involves perceiving and understanding the emotions of others. And then finally, relationship management involves using that social awareness to create and maintain positive and productive connections to others. So, emotional intelligence is enacted through competencies or skills that align with those four components. So with self-awareness, if we have self-awareness, we can know what we are feeling in the moment and use our emotions to guide our decision-making. Self-management is a two-parter. It consists of self-regulation and motivation. So self-regulation is handling our emotions so that they facilitate rather than interfere with the task at hand. Motivation is using our deepest preferences to move and guide us towards our goals and to persevere in the face of setbacks and frustrations. Social awareness is the application of empathy. I see someone in the chat mentioned empathy specifically. It looks like Taylor. So empathy is using, or that is sensing what people are feeling, taking on their perspective, and cultivating rapport with them. And then finally, with relationship management, we use social skills to handle emotions and work with them to persuade, lead, negotiate, and settle disputes, all things that leaders are called upon to do. So, is emotional intelligence an art or a science? Are some people just naturally emotionally intelligent and the rest of us are out of luck? I was talking with my spouse today about that. One of our daughters just seems to have that natural emotional intelligence, just really gets people and responds in a really supportive way. So, we can all probably think of people like that we might describe as emotionally intelligent. They just seem to get how we and others are feeling. They're good at reading a room, and they can motivate a group of people to get things done. But that doesn't mean the rest of us are out of luck. Some people might be more gifted with emotional intelligence, but all of us can cultivate emotional intelligence to better understand and manage our own emotions and to lead teams effectively. So let's take some time to explore ways we can cultivate our own emotional intelligence. And I know I've been talking for a bit, but we'll give you a chance to have a conversation in the chat in just a moment, because you're going to help us identify ways to cultivate some emotional intelligence competencies. But I'll go ahead and start with the first one, self-awareness. So as discussed earlier, self-awareness is perceiving and understanding our own emotions and using that understanding to guide our decisions. So here are some ways to cultivate self-awareness. That includes identifying your own triggers. Being aware of what triggers you can help you moderate your reaction in those situations. Another is to not judge your feelings. As we've seen, they're not 100% under our conscious control, so we should not feel guilty about or judge them. But we can try to hold them up for observation, for us to kind of inspect them and review objectively. So my heart is racing. Why is that? Why am I feeling this way? Another tip is to not make decisions when your emotions are running strong, whether those are good or bad emotions. Some emotions color our thinking and can cause us to make choices that might be too cautious, or conversely might be too confident. They could be decisions that are a little too unimaginative or timid, or maybe too overconfident and unrealistic. So don't make an important decision if you're feeling great or if you're feeling emotionally, or if you're struggling or feeling a sense of being emotionally overwhelmed. Finally, you could keep a journal to record your experiences and analyze how you felt about them and how you might approach them differently in the future. Obviously, this takes time and effort and might not be a practical approach for everyone, although you can probably find apps out there that might offer a somewhat more convenient way for journaling, or at least jotting down a few quick reflections as you experience strong emotions or conflict in the moment. So I like the Day One app for this, but it's been around for a while, so I'm sure all of you probably know of something that's newer or better, or as seems to be the way people do things these days. Maybe you could make a TikTok out of it. I'm showing my age there. So yes, we have. So I've talked for a while. Let's get some generative conversation going here. Andy, do you want to walk us through the activity?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Eric. As Eric mentioned, we now have a series of brainstorms to help get you thinking about some ways that you could cultivate emotional intelligence skills for those other three components. So Eric just did it for self-awareness. Next up is self-management. You'll recall that this involves skills in self-regulation as well as motivation. So we'll use the chat. So if you would, please share some ideas that you have for ways that you could develop or practice self-management skills. So develop or practice your self-regulation or your motivation. And as you post in the chat, please remember to toggle that to all panelists and attendees so that everyone will see your response. Well, while some of you are typing, I'll go ahead and add. One of the things that I've heard that has been useful for me is to like intentionally build in some little breaks for yourself that are really just a check-in, just checking in on myself. Like, hey, how am I doing? How am I feeling? How's my breathing? How's my heart rate? And using that as a way to do a little bit of the self-regulation. If things are a little bit out of whack, how can I try to get back to it? Let's see, a couple thoughts have come in already. First is meditative state of mind, says Brian, and attending this webinar, of course, is a great way to learn about emotional intelligence. Let's see, knowing when to take a timeout. So yeah, again, if you're getting really emotional, knowing that that's a time for a break. To take a breath, to step back from what's happening, go for a walk, after a long or stressful day. Let's see, Tyler talks about journaling. If you keep a journal, be intentional about rereading some of your older entries to inform future situations. So that's really good, and one that I was never very good at. I would journal, and then that was it. I didn't really do much with it. So it's important to keep that piece of it front of mind. Doing breath work or sensory stimulation, reflection, using self-awareness to self-manage, figuring out which activities help you to de-stress, and then use those in the moment if you can. Let's see, another about reviewing your day or an experience. Thinking about motivation. Take time to think about what I've done or accomplished or done well today. So that's great. Highlight successes, and that will cultivate more of them. Kira says, I'd like to have some kind of comfort object nearby in spaces where conflict may arise. Could be a picture, a sweater that I wear to the office, a nice smell, or whatever. I find I'm better at staying grounded if I can touch, see, or smell something to maintain my awareness. That's great. Thank you. All right, so some great responses there. Eric, any thoughts you want to add?
Yeah, this is a good list and touches on a few things I was going to suggest, but I didn't have to because all of you had such good ideas. But just to kind of hit on a few high points. So yes, breathing exercises are often quite helpful. Sometimes we don't realize how helpful they can be, or how even just taking a couple of moments to take a few quick breaths can really help us control emotions that we feel might be running away from us a bit. Of course, everything your doctor tells you to do to keep physically healthy, like eating right, exercising, getting enough sleep, limiting your use of alcohol and drugs, will also support emotional health and help you build your self-regulation muscles, so to speak. As someone mentioned, meditation and mindfulness practices can help. as can things such as optimism, goal setting, and gratefulness. And someone mentioned this as well, or I saw a couple of variations on this, the idea of at the end of the day, reviewing your day, seeing what you did that, see how you contributed to something that was successful or something that you were grateful for. Helps you kind of wind down the day on a positive note, and has been shown to support positive mental health and emotional health in the long run. Okay. And I did want to share, I don't know if anyone listens to the podcast Hidden Brain, but a few weeks ago they did a show on the idea of forgiveness, and not just forgiving others for things they do to you, but forgiving yourself for things that you did to yourself, or those little foibles and faux pas that we all make, those little things we all wish we could take back, but just being generous to yourself and forgiving yourself for being human. That can go a long way towards helping us build emotional resiliency, which helps with self-management, which helps with emotional intelligence and managing conflict.
All right, great. Thank you for those suggestions, Eric, and for everyone who shared in the chat. Let's go on and look at the next component. So this next brainstorm is about social awareness, which you'll remember is perceiving and understanding the emotions of others. So essentially, it's about empathy. So if you have ideas, please share some ways that you can develop and practice empathy and other social awareness skills. And again, you'll need to toggle to all panelists and attendees if it defaults back. So what are some ways you can cultivate your social awareness skills? Let's see, try to listen to others. It's a great one. That active listening mode, and not only listening, but watching, what's the verbal, but what are the nonverbal cues that come with it? And some other exposition on that. Listen to understand rather than to respond. Listen to the stories of others' life experiences. Try to think about the situation from the other person's perspective. Yeah, so try to get a sense of where they're coming from, understanding maybe their traditions of their culture, or other experiences that they may have had recently or in the past. Let's see. Recognize that you don't need to know all the answers, right? So it's not necessarily your role to always have the answer to everything. That can sort of take some of the pressure off. Let's see. Meet people at their point in need. Be open to new experiences, so to underscore the active listening rather than just passive hearing, so to use some of that echoing and repeat back what you just heard, try to make sure that you're really getting it right. And of course, showing respect for others. So yeah, a lot of great suggestions there. Eric, what would you add?
Yeah, a couple folks mentioned listening and, active listening. That's been around a while, and it's probably a cliche at this point, but it's always something that's easier said than done, especially when our emotions are running strong. But yeah, trying to focus your attention on what someone is saying, not interrupting them, paying attention to verbal and nonverbal cues, restating what you hear so that the other person or group feels heard. Yeah, all of that helps. There was, thinking about it from another perspective that, links back to empathy, which we saw earlier or talked about. And then, yes, watch reactions of others. I kind of like this idea of being an observer of both yourself and of others, or almost being like an anthropologist. Sometimes that might help with our own self-regulation and self-management to sort of kind of separate ourselves from ourselves mentally and say, oh, I notice Eric is feeling this. Why is Eric feeling this way? But also it might help to think of us as like an anthropologist of sort or observer of the interactions around us. It just kind of separate it, not take things personally, not react to triggers, but just sort of say, huh, that's interesting. Why is that happening? So just be a scientist of sorts, or at least a neutral observer. So with all of this, we can see how all of this reinforces itself. If you cultivate your self-awareness and your self-regulation practices, that will help you be more socially aware because, as I said, you won't take things personally. You won't overreact. You'll just be able to kind of maintain a stable presence and to be more critical in the sense of not reacting, but being more thoughtful about what you're interpreting and how you're responding. So thank you.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Eric. So let's go on to the last one, which is relationship management. So you'll remember relationship management involves using social skills to handle emotions in relationships. That means accurately reading social cues and contexts, and then working with them to persuade, lead, negotiate, and settle disputes to enable cooperation and teamwork. So again, we'll use the chat for this. That's our last little brainstorm for this part of the session. So what are ideas you have for ways that you can develop and practice relationship management skills? All right, so one of the Thomases recommends morning meetings to sort of do that check-in and see where folks are. Role-playing, going back to self-awareness, recognizing your own triggers and making sure those don't get in the way in your relationships. Making time for check-ins with your coworkers so that you can, learn more about them, what's going on, and hopefully get some of that context for the relationship. Take management classes or webinars to expand your skills in relationship management, or talking with managers who are working in a similar field. Let's see, using a Motivational Monday or some kind of positive mental health awareness activity, do it on a regular basis. Open door policy, yeah. So if you are having ongoing relationships with your colleagues, being approachable and allowing them to come to you whenever they need for that kind of connection. Here's an idea to conduct some kind of a survey to ask what they might want in a relationship or in a manager. Let's see, following through with conversations or checking in with someone, especially if they expressed something that excited or troubled them. Yeah, so in the moment, maybe you can't explore it fully, but doing a follow-up afterwards and saying, hey, you mentioned something, and coming back to that and see if there's anything more to unpack. Rewarding achievements, yeah, so that way that does help build that social capital in your relationship with them. Maintaining confidentiality, establishing and respecting personal and professional boundaries. And again, a recommendation about having those meetings, regular one-on-one meetings, can be a great way to build and strengthen your work relationships. So a lot of great ideas, a lot of great suggestions there. Eric, do you have other thoughts that you would add?
Not many. These are some really good ideas folks have. And, check-ins are definitely something we stress with Vista leaders as important. And also we share with Vista members as an important strategy for maintaining a good working relationship with their supervisors as well. To this, I'd only add just a couple of quick thoughts, always being honest and truthful. You would hope that it kind of goes without saying, but sometimes it takes a little bit of effort. So someone referred to this, but it was celebrate all achievements. So kind of along those lines, using praise generously and blame sparingly, and then just being curious about others. Of course, also sometimes what we might need to do is we might need to say no in certain situations. So finding ways to practice saying no in polite and diplomatic ways is a skill we can try to cultivate.
All right. Thank you for that, Eric, and thank you everyone for your contributions here. I will compile all of these ideas, and then after the webinar, I'll send them out along with the recording so that everyone will have a list of what we created here today.
Okay, thanks, Andy. So yeah, thanks everyone for participating in that brainstorming activity. We'll now make a switch to looking at specific ways we can use emotional intelligence skills to approach and manage conflict. So just quick preview, we're going to share with you, we're going to go over these approaches, but then we'll have a chance for you all to think about them and apply them to a situation a Vista leader might find themselves in. So apologies a bit for talking for the next few minutes. I'll try to keep it concise here. So there are a lot of approaches and information in many models you can find online for managing conflict. They all tend to get a little repetitive over time and kind of repeat some of the same strategies. And this is where it's part art, part science. There's no one right way to diffuse conflict, and it's going to depend on the context of the conflict. But we have a short time together, and so as we looked around for frameworks and models, we thought we would focus in on the list that you see here, particularly because they show a strong connection to an application of emotional intelligence. Each can be used on its own in the moment of a conflict, and that may be enough. You may just use one of these at one time, and that's fine. That's all the situation called for, and you're all set. Or they can be used together and sequentially if the context and the timing of a conflict allows for a more formal processing of conflict. So we're going to talk about the items you see on the list there: staying calm, listening, using empathy, finding common ground, focusing on facts, sticking to the rules, agreeing on solutions, and following up. So, and some of these were referenced by several of you in the course of the chat activities we've been having. So, as I said, you all are well on your way to being emotionally intelligent leaders. So let's take a look at each of these in more detail, and then we'll see how we might apply them to a scenario. So the first up is stay calm and observe what is happening. So this is staying in control of your emotions, remaining neutral, and trying not to take things personally or trigger your freeze, fight, or flee reflex. So some things you can do or say to help with staying calm, and several of you put this in the chat, but suggesting a pause to give yourself and others a moment to breathe and calm down and gather your thoughts. You can also suggest a rewind or a stepping back, kind of grounding yourself in the moment and redirecting yourself and others. So there are a couple of, quotes or phrases you could try using. And what this does is this allows us to tap into self-awareness and self-management components of emotional intelligence. So the next item is to listen. again, several of you identified this. So this is listening actively to hear out concerns, seek out the sources of disagreement or the root causes of conflict, and confirm understanding so that people feel heard and that a critical piece of information is not missing or being withheld. So phrases like you can see on the screen, such as, can you say more? And what I think I hear you saying is encourage people to talk and or make sure that they feel heard and understood. So the main emotional intelligence components here are self-management and relationship management. Next up is empathy. We've already discussed this a couple of times now, but this is conveying care and appreciation for what a person is bringing forward and acknowledging what has been said. Empathy here also includes reading the room to recognize discomfort or disagreement and validate emotions to help de-escalate tensions. So phrases you can use here that provide caring and acknowledging language include, so what I'm hearing or what I'm seeing is, that sounds important, and I see why you're upset. If you're with a group of people, acknowledging that other people might feel similarly is a good approach as well. You could say, does anyone else here feel like we, whatever, such and such? Conversely, you may also want to acknowledge when people are not in agreement by saying aloud something along the lines of, it seems like we're not in agreement. Maybe a little too obvious there, but you get the idea. Finally, empathy also includes taking responsibility for how you may have contributed to a conflict. So apologizing for your behavior or acknowledging your part in conflict can result in reducing anger and de-escalation of conflict. So phrases like, I apologize for such and such, or I acknowledge how I did such and such, can be disarming for some conflicts, can help disarm some conflicts. So the main emotional intelligence components here are social awareness and relationship management. The next approach, and sorry, I know we're throwing a lot at you in a short amount of time. We'll give you a chance to reflect a bit on these and think about how you might apply them shortly. But the next one is finding common ground, which involves looking for and identifying a starting point for resolution. It focuses on defining or confirming a clear picture of the issues and needs, fueling a conflict and possibilities for a path forward. So this can be accomplished by us as leaders summing up a situation using such phrases as, it seems like we can all agree on, or we might ask others to identify with questions such as, what can we all agree on? So put the work on the group to come up with the solution or the potential agreement. Other phrases might be, what's working okay so that we can start from there? Or let's see if we can work out what we all need so we can see how close we are. And the main emotional intelligence components here are self-awareness, social awareness, and relationship management. So the next one is focus on facts. This helps depersonalize issues and provide a basis for agreement or resolution of a conflict. Some language you could use to focus on facts could be, what would an outside observer make of this? This is kind of like that anthropologist idea I was talking about earlier. Walk me through what we know happened. It's also a good idea to check facts when you summarize with language like, tell me if I have this right. And here we're connecting with the emotional intelligence components of self-awareness and relationship management. And I did just see in the chat, thank you, we do have a handout for this presentation that summarizes these approaches we're talking about now. So stick to rules. Sticking to rules in a conflict situation helps guide people's expectations and behaviors. Some conflicts result from differences in expectations or boundaries, and these often go unsaid unless we call explicit attention to them. So many teams establish formal or informal working agreements at the start of their work together. If you I know we haven't done ISTs in a while, but if you did ever go through a face-to-face Vista training that Andy and his team put on, you might remember going through a working agreements exercise at the start of the work together. But working agreements help them proactively identify how they will agree to disagree and solve problems and conflicts productively. It will also establish a baseline of expectations for mutual respect and boundaries of acceptable behavior if and when emotions are running high. Ideally, you'd establish working agreements with your team at the start of your work together. However, it can still help in a conflict situation to pause and ask everyone to help identify some ad hoc working agreements to help you work through an acute conflict situation. So you could say something like, let's set some ground rules for this discussion, or let's remind ourselves of our team working agreements about such and such. The main emotional intelligence components you are tapping into with this one are social awareness and relationship management. Okay, just two more here. Agreeing on a solution involves identifying and agreeing on a path forward. While it's important to fully hear out needs and concerns, it's also important eventually to redirect group energy towards problem solving. You can nudge your group or your team along by proposing a solution or path forward by saying things like, what if we, or you can prompt the group to identify it themselves with questions such as, what are some ways we can, etc. So generating solutions is best with a give and take approach that combines both you proposing some ideas, but also prompting your team to identify a solution or resolution. And the main components here you're tapping into are self-management and relationship management. Okay. And finally, we have follow-up. So this is where you summarize and remind people of agreed upon resolutions and action steps. Ask them to identify how the group will handle similar situations in the future and provide a mechanism for follow-up and accountability. So you can see on the screen there some phrases that might help, like let's review, how can we prevent a repeat of this if there was a conflict? And also, please come talk to me if you're making yourself available and accountable to ensure that the resolution is followed up on or applied. And the main emotional intelligence components you're tapping into with this one are self-management and relationship management. So those are the 8 approaches. As I said, there's the handout available to you in the session files for the webinar that provides a copy of this. So you can have that handout along with a copy of the slides to review these strategies. And yes, apologies for kind of rushing through them, but we do want to be respectful of your time. But we do want to give you a quick chance to apply this. So understanding we don't have too long, but to see how we might use this, we have a scenario up on the screen here, and we'll ask you to see how you might apply some of these strategies we just discussed. So let's take, you can read it on the screen, but I'll also read it out loud. This is a situation maybe you're experiencing now in working with your Vista team. But in your biweekly virtual team check-ins, one member rarely turns on his camera. And when he does, he often seems inattentive, distracted, or like he is doing something else and not paying attention to you or the other team members. So let's see what we might do with this.
All right, so next we'd like you to think about strategies that you could use to approach the situation. So we will put the 8 strategies that Eric reviewed up on the screen and give you a chance to think about some ways that you could use any one or more of those strategies in this situation with the distracted member. So again, we'll use the chat for this. And if you when you share a strategy, say you're going to use listen somehow, add a few words to just describe how you might apply that particular approach. So we've got the distracted member on the weekly team meetings. What would you do to approach that? Let's see, Kendra says, maybe send an email and ask him if something's going on. So stay calm and follow up. Great suggestion.
Yeah, I like that because you don't necessarily, you're getting at some possible root causes. You know, is his life or work situation troublesome in some way that he's really can't concentrate? Are there some cultural issues at play? Is there more happening that's not immediately obvious behind the immediate behavior that you're witnessing?
Yeah, and April says, you could ask if there's a different platform, maybe that he prefers to use for the check-in or meeting. Mara suggests using empathy, recognize when vistas are zoomed out. You know, I guess that means they've been on Zoom calls the whole day and they just can't take one more. And maybe send a survey to see if there's a more optimal time to have that check-in meeting. Great ideas. Let's see. So bring up in monthly check-ins with curiosity and empathy and understanding in my voice. So be sure to relay my concern with overall well-being and how their service is going. Let's see. This is something that can be hard to interpret. You know, sometimes a person could have in their mind so many thoughts about their life situation, and you know that they at the same time that they're watching the Zoom. So what's going on? It may be just nothing. It could be a normal expression sometimes. So absolutely, this maybe we're reading too much into it. So there could be maybe I'm interpreting that to mean focus on the facts and to go back and see like, oh, well, this is what I'm observing. Is this what's really happening? Let's see. A couple more here. Find common ground. Begin meetings with a team energizer and a check-in, right? Get a pulse on what's going on in the group. Collect suggestions from the team members, how they would like to start off the meeting. Let's see. And a suggestion to first stay calm and remind the group of the norms, right? So going back to the rules piece and see if that has any effect. If it's still a problem with that individual, you know, then maybe, I guess, in a one-on-one, listen to them, get the reasons for the behavior, be empathetic, and see if you can resolve it. And Mara also talks about group rules, create group rules, defining what participation level we all want. You know, is the camera on or is it off? Sharing in the chat a lot or in some other way. So yeah, participation can look different to different people. All right, so lots of great responses there. Eric, anything that you would like to add?
No, they all look good. They all look like great applications of the strategies we shared, and maybe potentially that folks found useful or think would be useful based on their experience. So thank you all very much for contributing to that. We do have a second scenario. Andy, I'm just looking at the clock. I'm wondering if we might want to save that for some homework or save for another day. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think we'll have time to really get much response. So we'll go ahead and move on. We want to do just a quick little wrap up and then share some resources that I think might be helpful. All right, so yeah, we've covered a lot of ground on the webinar. So let's do a quick recap of what's already been discussed. Like I said, we've got some additional information, and then we want to give you one more chance to reflect on what you've learned. So Eric, back to you.
Sure. So just to sum up briefly, you know, some of this is somewhat intuitive. So emotional intelligence is being aware of yourself and others and treating people with respect. So, we can certainly make it more complicated than that. But that's what emotional intelligence is as a nutshell. But, it's easier said than done. Like anything else, responding to conflict in emotionally intelligent ways takes work and experience. But just like cognitive intelligence or IQ, practicing emotional intelligence begets more emotional intelligence. That is, the more we do and experience and try and apply, the better we get at it. So before we go, just wanted to share some resources if you want to do a deeper dive on emotional intelligence. On the screen are images of some books that were sources for this session and maybe worth a read. Some of them go back quite a few years. I think I read one way back in the 90s. So, definitely look for newer editions of the books, or if the authors have written in other contexts. So you might find articles or blog posts or podcasts or other publications by some of these authors who have kind of expanded on their initial thinking or taken the work in additional directions. So yes, so some recommended reading there. And with that, we'll go ahead and do that summarizing activity that Andy described. So Andy, you want to give folks some instructions on this?
Sure. Thanks, Eric. We'll give you a moment here to process everything that we've covered in the session and give you a chance to reflect on what you might do with it. So we want to circle back to that initial reflection that we did back at the start of the session, where you thought about a time where you experienced or observed a conflict. So now we'd like you to take another moment, think about how you might feel or act differently to that situation or a similar situation based on what you've just learned about emotional intelligence. So if that thing were to happen again, how might you respond differently? Let's see. So Tyler shares, I try to pause and observe my own feelings before diving in to the conflict directly. Great. So using some of those strategies about remaining calm and pausing and doing some of that reflection. Great. Well, I'm sure a lot of you are formulating your response in your mind, so I won't wait for you to actually type it in, but let's go ahead and I want to invite you to take our survey. We collect feedback on all of our webinars, and I really welcome your thoughts here. Your feedback is going to be really important for Eric, so he'll know about how he did on the presentation. It's also really helpful for me as I'm planning future sessions and looking at topics that we'll offer. The link is in the chat, but also it's probably already open. The survey is already open in your browser window. Takes about 3 minutes to complete, so I really welcome you to do that. And want to invite you to our next webinar, which is coming up on Thursday, April 15th. It's a chance for you to do some sharing around recruitment practices. So we're calling it a recruitment roundtable for Vista leaders. We'll be sharing some information, but it's going to be mostly interactive. You'll have a chance to discuss your recruitment challenges and successes and get peer support and ideas from other leaders. So we hope to see you there. I again want to thank our presenter, Eric Stiefvater at Education Northwest, for such an informative presentation. Also thanks to Bethany DeSablin for her instructional design assistance, and our production team today of Kim Adams and Julie Gentile. And thank you for joining. We hope to see you again soon. This concludes today's presentation, and you may now disconnect.